Hello everyone, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about supervision and evaluation. Now, we've spent some time considering characteristics and skills of direct care staff and how to support them in the role of supervisors, how we specify work responsibilities, and other important considerations for staff training and treatment acceptability. In this section, we'll address how monitoring treatment integrity and monitoring performance of staff while in the role of supervisor comes together. What we haven't addressed specifically thus far is how the evaluation systems allow for a supervisor to also receive feedback from staff. Performance feedback and evaluation is multi-directional. It's not just about the supervisor delivering feedback to staff, but also finding ways to receive feedback about their own supervision practices. It's part of professional development of supervisory skills. And a key factor to consider includes what the perception and the experiences of the individuals we supervise, and how that relates to our supervision practices and effectiveness in terms of leading teams, supervising one person individually, and ultimately all of this supporting staff effectively and happily supporting our target clients. So the BACB standards for supervision also address that effective supervision should include ongoing evaluation of the supervisor and the supervision process. And so this also calls for evaluation systems and practices to be in place that allow us to measure how our supervisory actions have impacted staff performance and create opportunities for staff to provide us with feedback or create opportunities for the individual we're supervising, perhaps in a practicum work relationship. So in this video, I'll talk very briefly about the value of feedback as a supervisor, and then what supports creating those opportunities to also receive feedback so that you can provide your staff with the most effective feedback for their performance as well. So the value of feedback should be considered from many perspectives. The first is that it creates accountability for us as supervisors. It creates accountability for our supervisory practices and our own growth in our skill set. It also adds value to an organization by contributing to that organization's sustainability and the systems within it. If we have systems that effectively provide staff with feedback and also create cultures where staff are comfortable providing their supervisors with feedback, that kind of a feedback loop contributes hopefully to happiness at work, a positive work culture, and in turn might reduce staff turnover or just maintain that staff want to continue working in that organization. So sustainability of the organization can certainly be impacted by effective feedback being given in a multi-directional way. It can also give information about what a supervisee values in the supervision process and then shape goals of the supervisor for how they proceed in their supervision practices. And then I mentioned this already, organizational climate is worth considering in terms of the role that effective evaluative systems for supervisors also play. So in Chapter 5 of your Parsons Reed and Green book, you'll review the guidelines for making formal monitoring acceptable to staff. And it's important to include in this process opportunities for direct care staff and for people in other roles that you might be supervising, to provide opportunities for them to give you feedback on things like your feedback delivery, acceptability of that. All of that is an important component of being an effective supervisor. So this is really about finding out what staff value, specifically type of feedback delivery that a staff person may prefer, vocal versus written, and we've addressed that in previous sections in this course as well, and we'll continue to do so. The timing of feedback delivery, immediate versus delayed, and variations of that. The frequency and consistency of feedback being delivered. Also the content and quality of that feedback. So does the supervisee feel they are getting feedback that supports their skills developing in the way that they hope, or in the way that they've set as a goal, and that they're able to make improvements there? And then also considering the tone of feedback and really creating a culture of feedback that demonstrates that feedback is a positive and desirable tool for skill improvement across the board, so for people in any position, and doing that without creating a culture of blame. Parsons, Reed, and Green address in one section in Chapter 5 this unfortunate concept of a we versus them narrative between direct care staff and people in management, and creating that culture of blame and that existing in an organization can really be a huge barrier to any kind of effective feedback system, or feedback rather being effective, whether it's from a supervisee to a supervisor, or a supervisor to a supervisee, but that being the primary concern there. So creating a culture of feedback being a positive and desirable practice can also support staff being more comfortable in voicing what they value, providing supervisors with feedback. It's important here to keep in mind that when we talk about different positions of power, so a supervisee providing feedback in any form to someone who is in a perceived authoritative position, that can be a very difficult process, and that makes it even more important to have systems in place that allow for that, where the supervisee does not have to take the initiative to do that, only to voice maybe dissatisfaction or voice things that they would like to see changed, but that a culture of those feedback loops has been established that involves positive feedback as well. Okay, so also in Chapter 5, when you're looking at those guidelines for making formal monitoring acceptable to staff, there's an important point made about opportunities for staff to observe the supervisor also performing the skills that are expected of staff, that this is an important variable in preventing and addressing potentially that narrative of us versus them that I already touched on, in terms of staff as us, management as them, and a perception of placing blame for problems that may exist. Staff having opportunities to observe and as a result also evaluate, at least informally, a supervisor performing the same skills that are expected of staff in terms of demonstrating teaching and intervention skills, is an important component of really creating a team and a culture and an organization where it's clear that standards for quality of instruction and service delivery are expected across all individuals in the organization. And while we touch mostly on supervision of direct care staff in this course, these things are also relevant as you move forward and are in other supervisory work relationships. So once you have your BCBA and continue to hone your skills, if you then feel ready over time to pursue supervising other individuals who are working towards their BCBA or their BCABA, or perhaps if you find yourself in a work setting where there are BCABAs who require the supervision of a BCBA, that you're also keeping in mind these same guidelines for supervising staff and putting in place systems that allow you to effectively evaluate their performance, and in doing so also receive feedback about how effective your supervision practices are, as measured by their performance, and then also as measured by the opportunities that you create where staff can provide you with feedback about what type of supervision would most support them in improving their skills and acquiring new skills. So just to review that, guidelines for making formal monitoring acceptable to staff. The first is that you want to inform staff prior to monitoring what will be monitored and why it will be monitored. You also want to set a certain tone where you are interacting with staff as you begin the performance monitoring process, that you're greeting staff, that certainly while it's formal performance monitoring and feedback, that there is still a culture that establishes communication that is positive, that is comfortable, and that really keeps the door open to that two-way communication that will also give you an opportunity as a supervisor to receive feedback. This also means that discontinuing monitoring if situations arise that are visibly uncomfortable for staff, that could be embarrassing in front of their peers, or simply if you are observing that that there's some negative, uncomfortable interactions and situations arising, that being in tune with that and observing for that, that also contributes to an atmosphere where that kind of communication and practice around what might make an individual uncomfortable really gets established. And that's also a necessary part of, as a supervisor, creating a culture that allows staff to practice giving that feedback, even if it is uncomfortable. Providing feedback to staff soon after monitoring, and within that, giving them an opportunity to provide feedback about what it felt like for them, how it could be different the next time, and then acknowledging and thanking staff for that process once you complete that monitoring process and feedback process. And in doing so, also building in opportunities where staff can provide you with direct feedback in your supervisory role. Okay, well, that's all for now on that topic. I would encourage you to continue thinking about how in your role as a supervisor in the future, and then also in the roles that you're in now, where you have a supervisor. Most of us will always have a supervisor, and many of us will be and continue to be supervisors to to staff in many different work dynamics. And so I would encourage you to continue thinking about how you can improve opportunities in your role as a supervisor for staff to provide you with feedback, how that might inform your goals as a supervisor and your professional growth in that skill area. And then also consider how, in your role as a supervisee in whatever work relationship you may have, how you might build opportunities to provide feedback, and also do some perspective taking practice in terms of thinking about what might make you uncomfortable in terms of providing feedback to a supervisor. I find that very helpful in terms of considering how then I as a supervisor create space and opportunity and create a culture of providing feedback in that supervisor-supervisee relationship in both directions. Okay, that's all. Thank you.